Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to be reading chapter 12 to you of I Survived the American Revolution, 1776. We are going to get through this book because our new packet involves reading a book and doing activities surrounding it. So I want to get through this packet and then we'll move on to that new book. All right. So by the second week of August, there was about 20,000 American soldiers in the camps in and around New York City, with more arriving every day. The Americans had built 10 big forts on Manhattan Island and 6 more across the river in Brooklyn. Each fort had a rough building surrounded by tall dirt and stone walls and deep trenches. The walls were topped with cannons. The men felt ready for battle, but still the British didn't attack. Rumors swirled. They heard about a new kind of cannonball called a shell. It exploded when it hit the ground. Spies reported that there were now more than 430 British ships anchored off of nearby Staten Island and at least 40,000 soldiers. And not all of them were redcoats. King George had hired 8,000 German soldiers to fight alongside the British. They were known as Hessians. Hessians! The men whispered the word like it was a curse. They're professional killers from Germany, Paul explained. Hessians were famous around the world for their dark green and red uniforms, their pointed silver hats, their thick black mustaches, and their thirst for blood. They began training when they were 5 years old. They fought mostly with their bayonets, which were twice as long as the ones the British used. You can see here we have the different soldiers. So this would be an American drummer boy, not a soldier. This would be an American soldier, an American officer, a Hessian soldier, a British soldier, and then a British drummer boy right here. Nate couldn't tell if the stories were completely true. He thought of the legends Papa and the men used to tell about giant squid and whales that swallowed up ships. The Hessians sounded more like storybook monsters than real-life soldiers. But there was no mistaking the fear in the men's eyes. But there was something even more dangerous than Hessians, and it was lurking right in the camp. Nate discovered it on a boiling afternoon. The men were on a marching drill, and Nate was alone in the camp doing his chores. The weather was beastly hot. The sun beat down, mosquitoes attacked them at night, and the usual camp smells turned into an unbearable stink, like you guys when you get back from PE. The most stomach-turning odors rose up from the open latrine pits, where the men and Nate all did their private business. Some days, Nate felt sure his nose would burn right off. Nate was taking a break from chopping wood. He took a swig from the tin canteen James had given him, and then he heard a strange sound, like an animal was crying out in pain. Nate looked around, thinking it was one of the cats that chased rats around the camp. He heard the sound again, and he realized it was coming from inside one of the tents. It was James' tent. Nate remembered that James had been ill yesterday. There were always gut sicknesses and fevers sweeping through the camp. Nate figured James had one of those. Nate stood outside the tent. "James," he said. "It's Nate. Are you all right?" Silence. More moaning. Nate's heart pounded as he stuck his head through the tent flap, and then he lurched back in horror. There was someone on the ground. It had to be James, except it didn't look like James or even a human being. Hundreds and hundreds of hideous blisters boiled all over his face. His arms and chest were covered too. It was smallpox, the most dreaded disease of all. It was the disease that stole Nate's mama all those years ago. It had almost killed Nate too. Nate pushed away his fear and disgust. He went inside and knelt next to James. He took James's hand. It was burning hot. "James," Nate said, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Go away," James rasped. "You'll get sick." "I had it already," Nate said, taking the young man's hand. "Having smallpox once, if it didn't kill you, meant you couldn't get it again." Almost half of the people who got the disease died. Some came through but were badly scarred. Eliza had scars on her cheeks. Theo had them all over his back. Nate didn't need a doctor to tell them that James was dying. He said a prayer and then rushed to find help. He returned with Paul and Martin, who were both safe from smallpox. Nate helped them bring James to the hospital. James died that night. Captain Marsh led a service for him. All of the men shed tears for that kind and generous man. The weeks ticked by. Nate became more and more restless. He worried that other men would get sick. He kept thinking of Papa. He missed Eliza and Theo. These thoughts weighed down on him, like rocks in his pockets. The mood of the camp grew darker, and then on the afternoon of August 21st, the sky suddenly turned black, and New York City was slammed by a thunderstorm more violent than even the storm that took Papa. Rain poured down. The howling wind ripped apart tents, knocked over trees, and sent barrels flying through the air. But most terrifying was the lightning. Blinding bolts stabbed down like Hessian bayonets. At a camp nearer to the river, 10 soldiers were struck dead by a single bolt. 3 other soldiers were hit as they were running along the street. The lightning killed the men and melted the coins in their pockets. Nate lay awake all night as the storm raged. He had the feeling that the furious wind was screaming out a warning, and it was. The next morning, word came that the British were on the move. Thousands of British troops had landed on Brooklyn just across the East River from New York City. The British attack was about to begin. So tomorrow I'm going to read chapters 13 and 14, and then we should be done with this book by the end of the week. You guys have a great day.